My wife was on the living room floor with blood beneath her nose. 11 feet away, in the dining room, I could hear my son laughing. He knew she had collapsed. He knew she was in distress. And he went back to the table. What I did to him in the next 48 hours, most people would call it cold. I call it necessary. But let me start from the beginning, because if I don't, you won't understand why I don't regret a single thing. People ask what I said when I walked into that kitchen. Whether I screamed, flipped the table, lost my mind. The answer is no. I didn't say much at all. But what I did to my son in the 48 hours that followed, most people would call it cold. I call it necessary. And if you want to understand why I don't regret a single thing, you need to hear the whole story, not just the ending. My name is Vernon Henderson. I'm 66 years old, and I've been married to my wife Lorraine for 32 years. We live in Thunderbolt, Georgia, a small town just outside Savannah where the marsh meets the water, and the air always smells like salt and diesel. I own Henderson Marine, 3 boat dealerships, and a marina that my father started with a single repair dock back in 1975. 50 years of work, $4.8 million in assets, built one customer at a time, one handshake at a time, one boat at a time. I was in Nashville that week, business meetings with a parts supplier. The kind of trip I'd made 100 times before. 3 days of conference rooms and handshakes and hotel coffee that tasted like regret. The last meeting was supposed to be Thursday morning, but Wednesday night, I got a call the supplier's CEO had a family emergency. Meeting canceled. Stay with me on this, because the details matter. I could have stayed in Nashville, could have explored the city, ordered room service, caught a show. Lorraine would have understood. But 32 years of marriage, and I still liked surprising my wife. Still liked watching her face light up when I walked through the door a day early with flowers in my hand. Sue me for being sentimental. I booked the first flight home Thursday morning. Landed in Savannah just after noon. Picked up my truck from the airport lot. Stopped at the florist on Abercorn Street for yellow roses. Her favorite since our first anniversary. The drive from Savannah to Thunderbolt takes about 15 minutes, if you hit the lights right. I knew every pothole, every turn, every house on that route. I'd driven it 10,000 times. But that Thursday, something felt different. You ever have that feeling in your gut that tells you something's off before your brain catches up? That low hum in your chest that says, pay attention. Something's wrong. Even when everything looks normal. I told myself I was being paranoid. Travel fatigue. Too much airport coffee. The sky was blue. The temperature was mild for December. And I was about to surprise my wife with flowers. Nothing to worry about. Then I turned onto my street. The first thing I saw was the car. A silver Lincoln Continental, polished to a mirror shine, parked right there in my driveway. Not on the street, not pulled to the side. Dead center of my driveway, angled like whoever parked it expected to own the place. I knew that car. Knew it the way you know a bad smell you can't quite place. Howard Myers drove that Lincoln like it was a personality trait. 67 years old, retired investment advisor, father-in-law to my only son. Howard had married his daughter Cressida off to my boy Sterling 3 years ago. And from the moment I shook his hand at the engagement party, something in my gut went cold. I couldn't explain it then. Howard was charming, successful, the kind of man who wore his wealth like a well-tailored suit, visible but not gaudy. He belonged to the Oglethorpe Club. His wife Gloria chaired charity galas. On paper, he was exactly the kind of in-law a father hopes for. But that handshake, too firm, too long, And his eyes, they watched me the way a man watches a chess piece he's already decided to sacrifice. I'd pushed that feeling down for 3 years. Told myself I was being overprotective. Sterling was happy. Cressida seemed devoted. The families got along well enough at holidays and birthdays. What more could I ask for? Now Howard's Lincoln sat in my driveway at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, a day I was supposed to be 400 miles away in Nashville. A day no one expected me home. That silver Lincoln, parked in my driveway, like he owned the place. I pulled in behind it and killed the engine. Sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, the yellow roses wilting on the passenger seat. The house looked the same as always. White siding, green shutters, the azaleas Lorraine planted 20 years ago lining the front walk. Our home, our life. But something was wrong. I couldn't hear it yet. Couldn't see it, but that thing in my gut. The same thing I'd felt when Howard first shook my hand 3 years ago was screaming now. Screaming loud enough that I left the roses in the truck. Loud enough that I walked toward my own front door like a stranger approaching enemy territory. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe Sterling and Cressida had stopped by for lunch. Maybe Howard was helping Lorraine with something in the garage. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why my son's father-in-law was parked in my driveway on a day I wasn't supposed to be home. Maybe, but I didn't believe it. Not for a second. I pushed the front door open, and the house hit me wrong. 2 different sounds from 2 different worlds, layered on top of each other under the same roof. From the back of the house, the dining room, maybe the kitchen, I heard laughter. Comfortable, relaxed laughter. The clink of dishes. Voices I recognized but couldn't quite place. The sound of people enjoying themselves. People with absolutely nowhere else to be. From the living room. Nothing. Silence. But it was the wrong kind of silence. Not empty, heavy. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind that tells you something is wrong before you see it. I dropped my bag in the entryway, left the roses in the truck where they belonged. My feet carried me toward the silence first, because that's what 32 years of marriage teaches you. You learn the sounds of your house. You learn the rhythms. And you learn when something is off. The living room was dim. December light filtered through the curtains, casting everything in gray. I saw the couch first. Then the coffee table. Then I saw her, Lorraine. My wife of 32 years, 63 years old. Former 5th grade teacher who spent 28 years teaching other people's children to read. Silver-streaked auburn hair that she still wore long because I told her once, back in 1993, that it made her look like a movie star. She was on the floor, not sitting, not resting. On the floor, her back pressed against the base of the couch, her legs splayed in front of her at angles that told me she hadn't chosen to sit this way. Her right hand was pressed beneath her nose. Her white blouse, the one with the little blue flowers that she wore to church on Sundays, was stained red. Blood. I have seen my wife cry at commercials. I have seen her laugh until she couldn't breathe. I have seen her angry, sad, joyful, and everything in between, but I had never seen her look the way she looked at me in that moment. Her eyes found mine the second I walked in. They locked on my face like a drowning person locks onto a rope, and I understood right then that she had been waiting, holding on, keeping herself upright by sheer force of will until someone came. Until I came. The moment she saw my face, something in her finally said, "Okay, he's here. You can let go now." "Vernon." Her voice cracked on my name. Just my name. Nothing else. I crossed the room in 3 steps, dropped to my knees beside her. My hands found her shoulders, her face, checking for injuries I couldn't see. The blood was coming from her nose. Not a cut, not a wound I could find. Just blood, dripping slow and steady onto that white blouse. What happened? I kept my voice steady, calm, the way you talk to someone who's scared. Lorraine, what happened? She opened her mouth to answer, and that's when I heard them from the dining room, 11 feet away. Laughter. I want you to sit with that for a second. I really do. Because I had to sit with it. I had to kneel there on my living room floor with my wife's blood on my hands and listen to people laughing. I recognize the voices now. Howard Myers, 67 years old. Retired investment advisor with a silver tongue and a silver Lincoln to match. His wife, Gloria, 64. The kind of woman who measured her worth in charity galas and country club memberships. And my son, Sterling, my 31-year-old son, sales manager at Henderson Marine, the boy I taught to ride a bike, to throw a football, to tie a bowline knot, the man I gave a job, a title, a future. He was in my dining room, laughing, while his mother sat on the living room floor with blood running down her face. Gloria's voice drifted through the doorway, something about Christmas plans, about the club's annual gala, about who was wearing what. Howard's low chuckle followed. Then Sterling, my son. His laugh was the loudest of them all. I looked at Lorraine. She looked back at me, and in her eyes I saw something I had never seen before in 32 years of marriage. Shame. Not shame at being found this way. Shame that I had to see what our son had become. Shame that she had been sitting here, bleeding, waiting, while the people in the next room ate off our dishes and laughed at jokes and never once, not once, thought to check on her. 11 feet. That's the distance. I measured it later, because I needed to know. 11 feet between my wife bleeding and my son laughing. The length of a small boat. The width of a grave. How long? I asked. My voice didn't sound like my voice anymore. It sounded like someone else. Someone cold. Someone who was already calculating. 20 minutes. Lorraine whispered. Maybe more. I called for help. I called Sterling's name. He said he'd be right there. 20 minutes. My wife had sat on this floor for 20 minutes, bleeding, calling for help, while our son promised he'd be right there, and then went back to his jokes and his in-laws and his comfortable laughter. I looked toward the dining room door. The laughter was still going. They hadn't heard me come in. They had no idea I was home. Good. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, and while it rang, while my wife bled, while my son laughed 11 feet away, I made a decision. A cold one. A necessary one. They just didn't know it yet. I did not panic. I want to be clear about that. Because what I did next required a man who was thinking, not a man who was feeling. The 911 operator picked up on the second ring. Female voice, calm and professional. I gave her the address. I told her my wife had collapsed, that she was bleeding from the nose, that her breathing was shallow. I answered every question while kneeling on my own living room floor, one hand pressing gently against Lorraine's cheek, the other holding my phone. And the whole time, I could hear them in the dining room. The laughter had softened, but it hadn't stopped. Dishes clinked. Someone said something about New Year's plans. My son's voice carried through the wall, easy and relaxed. The voice of a man who had no idea his mother was on the floor. Or maybe he did know. Maybe that was worse. The operator told me to keep Lorraine calm, to monitor her breathing, to stay on the line. I did all of it. I wiped the blood from her face with my bare hand because there wasn't time to find a towel. The blood was warm, her skin was cold. Those two facts lived in my head side by side, refusing to reconcile. I want you to understand what it takes to stay calm when your wife is bleeding and your son is laughing in the next room. It takes every single year of discipline you've ever built, every lesson about control you've ever learned, every instinct that tells you to stand up and walk into that room and ask what in God's name is wrong with the people in this house. I stayed. I held her hand. I watched her eyes flutter closed and then open again, fighting to stay conscious. And I waited. 8 minutes. That's how long it took for the paramedics to arrive. 8 minutes that felt like 8 years. The length of a commercial break. The length of a lifetime. When I heard the knock on the front door, I shouted for them to come in. I didn't move from Lorraine's side. 2 paramedics entered, a younger woman carrying equipment and a man in his mid-30s with a Chatham County EMS patch on his shoulder. He took one look at the scene and dropped to his knees beside me. Tate Redmond, 34 years old, with steady hands and the focused calm of a man who had seen real emergencies. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He just worked. Blood pressure cuff on Lorraine's arm. Penlight in her eyes, fingers on her pulse. I watched his face. When you've been in business for 50 years, you learn to read people. You learn what their expressions mean before they speak. And I saw it the moment his eyes registered the numbers on that blood pressure monitor. The slight tightening around his mouth, the way he looked at Lorraine and then at me. "Mr. Henderson," he said, and his voice was professional, clinical, without accusation. "Your wife is in hypertensive crisis. Her blood pressure is critically elevated." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. This didn't just happen. He kept working as he spoke, preparing an IV line, murmuring instructions to his partner. "The symptoms she's presenting, the nosebleed, the confusion, the weakness, these develop over time, hours, maybe longer." He looked at me directly then. Not with judgment, with the honesty of a man who tells the truth because lies waste time. She needed attention before this point. Someone should have caught the warning signs. Someone. The word hung in the air between us. He didn't know what had happened in this house before he arrived. He didn't know about the laughter, the dishes, the jokes about Christmas plans. He was just stating a medical fact. But I knew. I looked toward the dining room. The laughter had finally gone quiet. They must have heard the commotion, the front door opening, the paramedics moving through the house with their equipment. I could picture them in there now, frozen mid-conversation, finally realizing something was wrong. Something that had been hot and frantic inside me a few minutes ago went very, very still. Cold, actually. The kind of cold that doesn't burn, it calculates. A stranger, a paramedic who had never met my wife in his life, who didn't know her favorite flower, or the way she hummed while she cooked, or the sound of her laugh when something genuinely surprised her. He understood. He saw her for 8 minutes, and he understood that she had needed help. And in that dining room, 11 feet away, sat the man I raised. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The young man I handed a future to on a silver platter. My son. Sterling had watched his mother walk out of that kitchen. He had heard her say her head was pounding, and he had gone back to the table, back to the jokes, back to Howard and Gloria, and whatever comfortable lie they were all telling themselves. Tate and his partner lifted Lorraine onto the stretcher. She was stable enough to transport. Her eyes found mine one more time. Grateful. Exhausted. Afraid. I squeezed her hand. "I'll be right behind you," I told her. "I just need to take care of something first." She didn't ask what. She didn't have to. After 32 years, She knew. I watched the ambulance pull away with my wife inside. Then I turned and walked back into my house. I've walked into a lot of rooms in my life. Boardrooms where million-dollar deals hung in the balance. Hospital rooms where bad news waited. Courtrooms. Gravesides. But nothing has ever felt like walking into that dining room. The laughter was gone. Finally. Like somebody had reached over and clicked it off with a switch. They must have heard the commotion. The paramedics, the stretcher, the front door opening and closing. They must have realized something was wrong. I stood in the doorway and I did not rush. I've learned over 66 years that the most powerful thing a man can do when he's furious is slow down. Fast means you're emotional. Fast means they can dismiss you, write you off as overreacting. But slow means you've already decided what's going to happen. Slow means nothing they say is going to change it. Sterling stood up immediately. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor. The floor Lorraine and I had installed ourselves back in 1998. He knew. I could see it in his face. He didn't know all of it, but he knew enough to be afraid. Howard stayed seated, hands folded on my dining table like he was chairing a meeting he hadn't been invited to. Silver hair perfectly styled. Country club tan. The picture of composed authority. Gloria sat beside him, sweet tea sweating in her hand, frozen mid-sip. Every instinct in your body tells you to speed up in a moment like this. Raise your voice. Move fast. Make them feel the size of what they did. But slow is scarier. Slow says you've already made your decision and you're just letting them watch it unfold. I looked at Howard first, held his gaze for a long moment, let him feel the weight of it. Then I spoke, and I kept my voice so calm, it probably scared them more than shouting would have. Get out of my house. 3 words. No explanation, no preamble. Howard blinked. Gloria put her sweet tea down so carefully you'd think it was made of glass. Sterling opened his mouth to say something. I'm not talking to you yet, I said to my son. Still calm, still slow. Sit down. He sat, like a child, like the boy I used to send to his room when he broke the rules. Except he wasn't a boy anymore. He was 31 years old, and the rules he'd broken couldn't be fixed with a time out. Howard cleared his throat. I watched him shift in his chair, recalibrating. I'd seen this move before in boardrooms, in negotiations. The pivot from authority to reason. The attempt to become the rational adult in the room. Vernon, he said, and his voice was smooth as butter. I think if we all just take a breath here. Howard. He stopped. You ever see a man try to be reasonable when he's already lost? That's what Howard did. He tried to slow things down, tried to find the angle, tried to locate the leverage he thought he still had. But I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't discussing. I was informing. I didn't ask for a breath, I said. I didn't ask for a conversation. I asked you to leave my house. I'm only going to say it one more time. Silence. The kind of silence that has texture, weight. The kind you can feel pressing against your skin. Howard's jaw tightened. I could see him calculating running scenarios, looking for the response that would let him leave with his dignity intact. But there wasn't one. Not here. Not after what I'd just seen. Gloria moved first. She knew. Gloria knew before Howard did. Wives always do. She reached for her purse, one of those expensive leather bags that cost more than some people's rent. She touched Howard's arm, just lightly, just enough. And she gave him the look. That look wives give husbands when they're saying, not now, not here. We need to leave. Howard's nostrils flared just slightly, the smallest tell. He wasn't used to being dismissed, wasn't used to being on the losing side of a power dynamic. But Gloria's hand was still on his arm, and her eyes were saying what her mouth couldn't. He pushed back from the table. Slowly, the way men do when they want you to believe they're leaving by choice, not by instruction. He buttoned his jacket, straightened his cuffs. All the small rituals of dignity. "We'll discuss this when everyone's calmer," he said. I didn't respond. There was nothing to discuss. Gloria was already moving toward the living room, toward the front door, her heels clicking against that hardwood floor. Howard followed. Sterling started to rise. I said, "Sit down." He sat. And then Howard and Gloria walked through my living room, toward the door, toward their silver Lincoln parked in my driveway like they owned the place. But they had to pass the stretcher first. Lorraine was still there. The paramedics were finishing their prep, oxygen mask fitted, IV line secured, monitors beeping, and there was still blood on her collar. The white blouse with the little blue flowers, stained red. I watched Howard's face when he saw her. I watched Gloria's. They didn't say a word. They just walked faster. The front door opened. I heard Howard and Gloria's footsteps cross the foyer, heading for their exit. And then the footsteps stopped. I needed them to see her. I needed that image burned behind their eyelids for the rest of their lives. Gloria saw Lorraine first. The stretcher was still in the living room. The paramedics were doing final checks before transport. Oxygen mask fitted over my wife's face. IV line running into her arm. And that white blouse, the one with the little blue flowers, stained dark red at the collar. Gloria stopped walking. Her hand went over her mouth. Not theater genuine shock, the kind of reaction you can't fake. Howard went completely still beside her. I watched the color drain from his face, watched his jaw go slack. Whatever he had expected when he came to my house today, it wasn't this. It wasn't his scheme ending with a woman on a stretcher. Good. I stood in the dining room doorway and I watched them take it in. The beeping monitors, the paramedics' quiet efficiency. My wife's eyes closed, her chest rising and falling with assisted breaths. This is what you did. This is the price of whatever game you were playing. Gloria grabbed Howard's arm. She pulled him toward the door. They left without another word. The front door clicked shut behind them. I want you to really stay with me here, because what came next changed everything. The ambulance pulled away. I watched the lights disappear down the street, taking Lorraine to Memorial. I would follow soon, but not yet. Not until I understood what had happened in my house while I was gone. I walked back to the dining room. Sterling was still there, standing now, hands at his sides, jaw tight. He hadn't moved since I told him to stay. 31 years old, sales manager at the family business, married to Howard's daughter, the son I'd raised, the son I thought I knew. He had his mother's eyes, always had, light brown with flecks of gold. The kind of eyes that could charm a room or break a heart. And right now, those eyes couldn't decide whether to be defensive or ashamed. "Sit down," I said. He sat. I pulled out the chair across from him, the same chair Howard had been sitting in 5 minutes ago, acting like he owned the place. I sat, folded my hands on the table, let the silence stretch. Sterling shifted in his seat, opened his mouth, closed it again. He had his mother's eyes, and I had loved those eyes for 31 years through Little League games and graduations, and that one terrible summer when he was 16 and wrecked my boat trying to impress a girl. That made this harder, not easier. "Talk," I said, "and I want all of it." Sterling exhaled, ran a hand over his face, looked at the table, the wall, anywhere but at me. "Dad, don't start with an excuse. Start with the truth. Another exhale. Then he started talking. Howard and Gloria didn't just stop by today. This wasn't a surprise visit. I waited. They've been planning this for 6 weeks, maybe longer. They knew you were going to Nashville. They knew the exact dates. They waited for you to be gone. My hands stayed folded on the table. My voice stayed level. But something inside me went very still. Why? Sterling swallowed. They came with paperwork. Dad. Actual legal documents. Howard had them prepared months ago. You ever have someone you raised look you in the eye while they explain how they helped betray you? You ever sit across from your own blood and realize you don't know who they became when you weren't looking? What kind of paperwork? Sterling's voice dropped. Transfer documents. For Henderson Marine. The words hit me like a physical blow. Henderson Marine. The marina my father started in 1975. The dealerships I'd built from nothing. 50 years of Henderson work. Henderson sweat. Henderson legacy. Howard had it all laid out, Sterling continued. A restructuring plan. He said it would protect the business, make it more efficient. He said, Sterling stopped, swallowed again. He said you were too old-fashioned to see the opportunity, that you'd never agree. So we needed to move while you were away. We, I repeated. Sterling flinched. We, I said again. You were part of this. I thought. He stopped, started over. Howard made it sound reasonable. He said it was a partnership, that we'd all benefit. That by the time you got back from Nashville, the paperwork would be filed, and you'd see it was the right move. I stared at my son, at the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to tie a bowline knot, to shake a man's hand and look him in the eye, at the man who had just confessed to helping his father-in-law steal his family's legacy. And your mother? I asked. My voice was quiet now, quiet in the way that comes before storms. What happened with your mother? Sterling's face crumpled. She walked in on us. Howard had the documents spread out on the dining room table. Mom saw them. She started asking questions. He stopped, looked at his hands. She got upset, really upset. Her face went red, and she grabbed her head and said something was wrong. And then, Sterling's voice cracked. And then I went back to the table. 5 words. That's all it took to tell me who my son had become. His mother collapsed in the living room, grabbed her head, said something was wrong, and he went back to the table. I sat there for a moment, letting those words settle. The dining room was quiet now, just the two of us, father and son. Except I wasn't sure I knew the man sitting across from me anymore. Tell me about the 6 weeks, I said. Sterling exhaled. His shoulders dropped. And then he started talking. Really talking for the first time since I'd walked into this house. They didn't just stop by. Dad, this wasn't a social visit. Howard and Gloria have been planning this for 6 weeks. Maybe longer. Planning what, exactly? Planning to be here when you weren't. Sterling's voice was flat, defeated. Howard tracked your Nashville trip. He knew the dates before I did. He knew exactly when you'd be gone, and for how long. I want you to think about that. 6 weeks. 42 days of watching my calendar, tracking my movements, waiting for the perfect moment to make their move. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't opportunity. This was a calculated operation. They showed up the morning after you left, Sterling continued. Brought coffee and pastries like it was a friendly visit. Gloria talked to Mom in the kitchen while Howard pulled me aside. And what did Howard want? Sterling looked at the table. He had paperwork. Dad. Legal documents. Already drafted. Already printed. Already ready for signatures. My hands stayed folded on the table, but I felt my knuckles tighten. What kind of documents? Transfer documents for Henderson Marine. The whole operation, the dealerships, the marina property, everything. Sterling's voice cracked slightly. He said it was a restructuring plan. A way to streamline family assets, consolidate everything under one holding company. He made it sound smart, professional. And you believed him? Sterling stopped, started again. He had charts, Dad. Projections. Numbers that showed how much more profitable we'd be with his management structure. He talked about tax advantages, about protecting the assets from liability, about setting up the next generation. The next generation, I repeated. Meaning you and Cressida. Yes. The marina. The property my father bought in 1975 with money he saved working double shifts at the shipyard. The dock he built with his own hands. The business I grew from one repair shop to 3 dealerships. 50 years of Henderson work. And Howard Myers wanted to take it with a stack of papers and a smile. How much? I asked. Sterling looked confused. How much what? How much did he think he was going to take? What's the number Howard had in his head when he decided to come after my family? Sterling swallowed. The marina is valued at $4.8 million. The waterfront property alone, the development rights, that's another $2.1. $6.9 million. That's what my family's legacy was worth to Howard Myers. A number on a document. A target. And the documents he brought, I said. What exactly did they do? They would have transferred controlling interest to a new holding company. Howard would manage the company. Cressida and I would be partners on paper, but Howard would make all the decisions. Sterling's voice dropped lower. By the time the paperwork went through, you would have owned your business in name only. I kept my face completely still. Inside was a different story entirely. Inside was a man watching his son explain, in clinical detail, how he had helped plan the theft of everything his grandfather built. And you were going to sign these documents. It wasn't a question. Howard said. Sterling stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter what Howard said. Yes, I was going to sign. I had the pen in my hand when Mom walked in. My son looked at me across that table. He had his mother's eyes, the same light brown with flecks of gold. But right now, those eyes were hollow, empty, like a man who had finally seen himself clearly and couldn't stand the view. I was the tool. Dad, the words hung in the air between us. I was the tool, he said again. Howard didn't marry Cressida off to me because he liked me. He didn't welcome me into the family because I was good for his daughter. He married her to me because I was your son, because I had access to you, because, through me, he could get close to Henderson Marine. My son looked at me and said the words that broke something I didn't know could still break. 3 years, Dad. 3 years of dinners and holidays and playing the good son-in-law. And the whole time, I was just the door they needed to walk through to get to you. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Not yet. Sterling wiped his face with both hands, drew a breath, and then he said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There's more, Dad, about Mom, about what happened before you got home. Tell me, when she saw the documents, when she realized what Howard was trying to do, she didn't stay quiet. She confronted him. Right there at this table, Sterling's voice shook. And what he said to her, I think that's why she collapsed. I think that's what pushed her over the edge. And your mother, I said. Where does she come in? Sterling's face shifted. The hollow look in his eyes deepened into something worse, shame mixed with fear. He knew this was the part I needed to hear, the part that would explain everything. She overheard, he said. About 40 minutes after they arrived, Gloria had been keeping her busy in the kitchen, talking about Christmas plans, recipes, all the normal stuff. But Mom came into the dining room to refill her coffee. And she heard what Howard was saying about the restructuring, about the transfer documents, about Henderson Marine. Sterling swallowed hard. She wasn't having it. Dad, you know how she is. I did know. 32 years I've known exactly how she is. Lorraine Henderson doesn't back down. Not from pushy salesmen, not from rude neighbors, not from anyone who threatens what she loves. She's 5'4" and 130 pounds, and she has faced down men twice her size without flinching. What did she say? She told Howard directly that the marina wasn't mine to sign away, that you hadn't agreed to anything, that they were completely out of line coming here while you were gone. Sterling's voice cracked slightly. She called it what it was. Dad. She said it was a scheme. She said Howard was trying to steal what your father built. Pride swelled in my chest, brief and painful, because I knew where this story was going. And Howard, he tried to talk over her. You know how he does, that smooth voice, those reasonable phrases. But Mom wasn't having it. She got loud. Your mother raised her voice. She did. And then Howard got loud. And Gloria jumped in, trying to calm things down. But that just made it worse. Sterling stared at his hands. It went back and forth for a few minutes. Mom called Howard a con artist. Howard said she didn't understand business. Mom said she understood perfectly. She understood a thief when she saw one. The dining room was silent. Outside, I could hear birds, normal sounds on an abnormal day. And then what happened? Sterling's voice dropped. Then she just stopped. Stopped. She stopped arguing. She put her hand on her head. She said, he couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I already knew what he was about to say. She said her head was pounding. I finished for him. Sterling nodded. She felt dizzy. She said she needed to sit down. She excused herself and went to the living room. I let the silence stretch. Let it fill the room like water rising. Let Sterling feel the weight of what he was about to admit. And then I was going to check on her. His voice was barely above a whisper now. I stood up from the table. But then Howard, he started talking again. He said Mom was just being dramatic. He said we needed to focus on the business opportunity before you got back. And you listened to him. I got pulled back in. Sterling's hands were shaking. I thought she just needed a minute. I thought she'd be fine. She has high blood pressure, I said. My voice was steady, cold. The voice of a man who had stopped feeling and started calculating. She has had high blood pressure for 7 years. You have known that for 7 years. Dad. When she said her head was pounding. When she said she felt dizzy. What did you think was happening? Sterling's face crumpled. I don't know. I wasn't thinking. Howard was talking, and Gloria was pouring more coffee. And I thought she'd be okay. I thought she'd come back when she felt better. But she didn't come back. No, because she was on the floor, in the living room, bleeding. For 20 minutes. I didn't know. You didn't check. I cut him off. Not shouting. Something worse than shouting. Your mother told you she felt ill, and you didn't check? A paramedic, a stranger who had never met your mother in his life. He understood the urgency the moment he walked through that door. He took one look at her and knew she needed help immediately. Sterling was crying now, tears running down his face, dropping onto my dining room table. And you, I let the word hang in the air. You went back to the kitchen. Not a question, just the fact of it sitting between us like a body on the floor. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was that serious. I didn't think. That's exactly right. I stood up from the table, slowly, the way I'd learned to move when I was furious. You didn't think about your mother. You didn't think about what Howard was really doing. You didn't think about anything except whatever fantasy he was selling you. Sterling looked up at me, his mother's eyes red and swollen, searching my face for something. Forgiveness, understanding, a way back from what he'd done. He wasn't going to find it. Not tonight. I have to go to the hospital, I said. Your mother needs me. Unlike some people in this room, I don't leave family behind when they need help. Sterling flinched like I'd hit him. I walked toward the door. Then I stopped, turned back, and I said the words that made his face go completely pale. I don't know who you've been spending your time becoming, I said, but he is not the man I raised. Sterling's face went white. Not the white of embarrassment or the white of fear. The white of a man who has just heard something he cannot unhear. Something that will live inside him for years. There's a particular kind of moment when you realize someone you raised has become someone you don't recognize. It doesn't feel like anger. It feels like grief. Like standing at a funeral for someone who's still alive. I looked at my son, 31 years old, tears on his face, sitting at my dining room table where I had taught him to do homework and eat his vegetables and be a decent human being. And I felt nothing but distance. Dad, please. There is nothing you can say right now. I held up my hand. Nothing. Your mother is being loaded into an ambulance. She has blood on her clothes. She spent 20 minutes on our living room floor while you talked business with the man who came to steal our family's legacy. I know I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is missing an appointment. I kept my voice level, flat, the voice of a man who had moved past fury into something colder. What you did was a choice. You chose Howard. You chose the scheme. You chose to go back to that table while your mother needed help. I want you to understand something about what I said next. These weren't words spoken in anger. Anger burns out. Anger fades. These were facts. Cold, clinical facts that I delivered the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. I am going to the hospital now, I said. I am going to be with your mother. And you are going to sit in this house and think about the kind of man you want to be. Because the one I'm looking at right now, I don't recognize him. I walked out of the dining room. I did not wait for a response. There was nothing Sterling could say that would change what had already happened. In the living room, the paramedics were finishing their prep. Lorraine was on the stretcher, an oxygen mask over her face, her eyes half open. When she saw me, something in her expression shifted. Relief, exhaustion, love. I crossed the room and took her hand. Her skin was cool against mine. The IV line ran from her arm to a bag hanging on the stretcher rail. Monitors beeped in steady rhythm. I'm here, I said. She couldn't speak with the mask on, but she didn't need to. She squeezed my fingers, twice, light and quick. I squeezed back, twice. 32 years. That's how long Lorraine and I have had that signal. 2 squeezes. It started on our honeymoon when she was scared of flying and couldn't speak without crying. I took her hand and squeezed twice. She squeezed back. And from that moment on, that's what it meant. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Even now, even in the middle of this nightmare, we had this. "Sir, we need to transport her now," one of the paramedics said. "I'll follow in my truck." I held Lorraine's hand until they lifted the stretcher. I held it until they wheeled her toward the front door. I held it until the last possible second, until our fingers had to separate. Then I grabbed my keys and walked out of my own front door. I did not look back at the dining room. I did not check on Sterling. I did not say goodbye. I did not speak to my son again that night. Not at the hospital, where I sat in the waiting room for 3 hours while doctors stabilized Lorraine's blood pressure. Not when I finally got to see her, groggy and weak, but stable. Not when I drove home at 11 p.m., exhausted and empty. Sterling's car was gone when I got back. I didn't know where he went. I didn't care. The house was quiet. The dining room table still had Howard's coffee cup sitting on it. I picked it up, carried it to the kitchen, and washed it. Then I dried it and put it back in the cabinet where it belonged. Small acts of order in the middle of chaos. That's how you survive. Silence is a weapon most people never learn to use. They think talking is power. They think shouting proves strength. But silence, real silence, the kind with weight behind it, that's what separates the men who react from the men who plan. I sat on the edge of our bed that night, watching Lorraine sleep. The medication had finally let her rest. Her breathing was steady now, even. The color had come back to her face, and I thought about 32 years, about everything we had built together, about the marina my father started and the business I grew, about the son who had betrayed us both. I thought about Howard Myers with his silver Lincoln and his smooth voice and his 6-week scheme. And I thought about the man I would need to become by sunrise to protect what was left. When I get quiet, when I get very, very still, that's when you should be worried. By morning, I had a plan. It took the medication, the lowered lights, and 40 minutes of me just sitting on the edge of the bed holding her hand before her breathing finally evened out. Lorraine was home from the hospital, stabilized, blood pressure back to manageable levels. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic. No signs of stroke, no permanent damage that they could detect. But she needed rest, complete rest, and I was going to make sure she got it. I arranged her pillows exactly the way she liked them. 3 of mine, stacked just so, supporting her neck at the angle that kept her from snoring. I pulled the covers up to her chin. I sat on the edge of the bed and held her hand until her grip went slack and her fingers relaxed against mine. Then I watched her sleep. That beautiful, exhausted face. The face I'd woken up next to for more than 3 decades. The lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when we met. The silver threading through her auburn hair. My wife. After everything, after this nightmare of a day, still my wife. You ever watch someone you love sleep after they almost died? It changes you. It strips away all the nonsense, all the petty concerns, all the things you thought mattered. And it leaves you with one clear thought. This is the person. This is the only person. I sat there in the dark, listening to her breathe. And I thought about everything. 32 years. I thought about the woman who married me when I had more ambition than money. I was 24 years old, working at my father's repair dock, dreaming about things I didn't know how to build. And Lorraine saw something in me that I couldn't even see in myself. She worked beside me when we were building everything from scratch. Not behind me, beside me. When I wanted to buy the second dealership and the bank said no, she found another bank. When I worked 18-hour days during the busy season, she brought me dinner at the dock and kept the books until midnight. My father left me 1 repair dock and a dream. Lorraine helped me turn it into 3 dealerships and a marina worth millions. 32 years. more than half my life. Every good thing I have, she had a hand in building. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and Lorraine's steady breathing. Outside, the December night was cold and still. Inside, I sat with the weight of everything that had happened. I thought about Sterling. I thought about the boy Lorraine raised with more patience than I ever had. She was the one who stayed up with him when he had nightmares. She was the one who helped him with his homework, drove him to Little League practice, sat through every school play and band concert. She was the one who convinced me to give him a chance at the dealership when I thought he wasn't ready. More grace than he deserved. That's what she gave him. More chances than he earned. And now she lay here, in this bed, with medication in her system and monitors on her nightstand and a terrified look in her eyes when she first came home. Because of him. Because our son chose a dining room table over his mother. Because he heard her say she felt dizzy, and he went back to Howard's paperwork. Sterling didn't just fail his mother. He failed the woman who made him possible. I sat there until midnight, watching her breathe, thinking about everything, about Howard's scheme, about the documents Sterling was about to sign, about the 6-week plan to steal 50 years of Henderson work. And then I stopped thinking. There's a moment when grief becomes something else, when the sadness burns off and what's left underneath is clear and cold and absolutely certain. I felt that moment happen somewhere around 11:45. I leaned down and kissed Lorraine's forehead. She didn't stir. The medication had her deep under. "I'm going to fix this," I whispered. "I'm going to protect what we built." Then I stood up. I walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, and into my study. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and cracked my knuckles. I was not angry anymore. Anger is hot. Anger makes mistakes. Anger burns itself out. I was decided. And there is a profound difference. Decided is cold. Decided is patient. Decided looks at a problem the way a surgeon looks at a tumor. Clinical, methodical, ready to cut. Howard Myers thought he could walk into my house, target my family, and walk away with everything my father built. He thought he could use my son as a crowbar to pry open my life. He was about to learn something important. When you come for what's mine, when you come for the woman I love, the business my father started, the legacy I've spent 50 years protecting, I don't get loud. I don't make scenes. I don't give you the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. I get quiet. I get still. And then I take apart everything you thought was yours, one piece at a time. Starting with my son. I need you to understand something about me before I walk you through what happened next. I am not an impulsive man. I don't make decisions in the heat of the moment. I don't say things I'll have to take back, and I don't do things I'll have to undo. That's not who I am. That's not how I built a business that survived 3 recessions and 2 hurricanes. Every single thing I did that night. I had already decided while sitting in that kitchen listening to Sterling confess, while he talked about 6-week schemes and pre-drafted documents and going back to the table, I was making a list. Not on paper, in my head. A systematic inventory of everything I had given my son over the years, everything he had been living on, everything he had taken for granted. By the time I sat down at my desk, I wasn't planning anymore. I was executing. You want to know the difference between anger and decision. Anger fades. Anger burns itself out like a fire without fuel. You wake up the next morning, and the heat is gone, and you think maybe you overreacted. Maybe you should give them another chance. Decision doesn't fade. Decision is cold. Decision is permanent. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the back of my credit card. Not the regular customer service line, the other number. The one printed in small type at the bottom. The number that doesn't sleep. When you've had accounts long enough, and your balance has stayed high enough, and your payments have stayed consistent enough, you get access to that number. I'd used it twice in 27 years. Once when my wallet was stolen in Atlanta. Once when there was a fraud alert during a business trip to Miami. This was the third time. A woman answered on the second ring. Pleasant voice, professional tone. I gave her my account number and my security information. She verified my identity with 3 questions. How can I help you tonight, Mr. Henderson? I need to remove an authorized user from my account. Of course, I can help you with that. Can you give me the name of the authorized user? Sterling Henderson. A brief pause. The soft click of a keyboard. I see that Sterling Henderson has been an authorized user on this account since 2018. Is that correct? That's correct. And you'd like to remove his access to the account? Yes. Understood. I'll process that now. 7 years. Sterling had been an authorized user on my primary credit card for 7 years. Cash, groceries, dinners out, subscriptions I never questioned, charges I never audited, expenses I never asked him to justify because he was my son and I trusted him, and that's what fathers do. 7 years of trust. 4 minutes to remove it. That's all it takes when you're the one who built it. The woman on the phone was efficient and professional. She didn't ask why. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just processed the request with the same calm tone she probably used for every call at 2 in the morning. Mr. Henderson, I've removed Sterling Henderson from your account. He'll no longer be able to make charges as of... She paused, checking something. Now. The change is effective immediately. Thank you. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight? I thought about the list in my head. The credit card was just the first item. Not tonight. Thank you. I hung up and sat back in my chair. The study was quiet. Outside, the December night was dark and still somewhere in this town. Sterling was sleeping, maybe at his apartment. Maybe at Howard's house. I didn't know, and I didn't care. He had no idea what had just happened. He would find out tomorrow, or the day after. When he tried to buy gas or groceries and his card declined, I wondered how long it would take him to call me. I wondered what he would say. Then I stopped wondering, because it didn't matter. You think that's cold? I was just getting started. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my contacts. The car insurance company wouldn't have a 24-hour line, but I could leave a message. The apartment lease I'd co-signed that 3 years ago when Sterling moved into that nice place in Savannah, the one with the view of the river. The landlord's name was Gary Whitfield. I had his direct number. And then there were the monthly transfers. Every month for the past 9 years. I had moved $1,500 from my account into Sterling's. College money at first, then graduate school support, then just habit, a cushion, a safety net. The kind of thing a father does because he wants his son to have a good life. 9 years, $13,500 a year, over $120,000 total. Sterling never thanked me for it, not once. I'm not sure he even knew where it came from. It just appeared in his account every month, like magic, like something he was owed. That transfer was scheduled for the 15th of every month. Today was the 10th. I had 5 days to cancel it. I opened my banking app and found the recurring transfer. My thumb hovered over the cancel button. 5 days. But why wait? I pressed cancel. One more piece of the safety net. Gone. I moved on to the next item on my list, because by now there was a list. and I was working through it with the kind of focus I usually reserve for closing million-dollar deals. The credit card was gone. The monthly transfer was gone. But I wasn't finished. Car insurance. Sterling drives a sedan I helped him buy 4 years ago. Co-signed the loan when his credit wasn't strong enough to get the rate he wanted. The insurance that protects that car. It's been on my policy ever since. A family plan. The kind of arrangement that saves money and never gets questioned. I pulled up the insurance company's website. They had a 24-hour claims line, but policy changes required a different number. I found the after-hours option for existing customers and navigated through the automated system until I reached a live person. I need to remove a vehicle from my policy. Of course, sir. Can you tell me which vehicle? I gave him the details. Sterling's sedan. The one parked at his waterfront apartment. The one he used to drive to my dealership, to his meetings, to dinners with the in-laws who had tried to steal my legacy. The representative processed the change without hesitation. Effective immediately. Sterling would receive notice by mail within 3 to 5 business days. He wanted to know how much I was quietly carrying for my son. More than he ever knew. More than he ever asked about. The credit card he swiped without thinking. The transfer that appeared in his account every month like magic. The insurance that protected his car. The lease that let him live in a building he couldn't have qualified for on his own. Invisible support. The kind fathers provide without fanfare. The kind sons take for granted. Not anymore. I checked the time. Just past 3 in the morning. The apartment lease would have to wait until business hours. But I could prepare. Sterling and Cressida lived in a waterfront building in Savannah. Nice place. River views. The kind of building that requires a co-signer with a certain credit score and income level. When they applied 2 years ago, Sterling asked if I would co-sign. I said yes without hesitation. That's what fathers do. The landlord's name was Gary Whitfield. I'd spoken to him twice before. Once when Sterling moved in. Once when there was a maintenance issue that wasn't getting resolved quickly enough. Gary was a straightforward property manager. The kind of man who respected directness. I wrote his number on a notepad. 7 a.m. call. First thing when business hours started. The conversation would be simple. I would explain that I wished to remove my name from the lease at the earliest legal opportunity. I would inquire about the process, the timeline, the requirements. I would be polite, professional, and absolutely clear about my intentions. Sterling would have to requalify on his own, with his own credit, his own income, his own name. I wondered if he could. The study was quiet. The house was quiet. Lorraine was still sleeping, the medication keeping her under. Outside. December darkness pressed against the windows. Inside. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the evidence of a life I had built. The photos on the wall, the awards from the Chamber of Commerce, the model boat my father had given me when I was 12. That monthly transfer I had just canceled represented something beyond money. It represented a cushion, a safety net. The kind of thing that lets a man make careless choices because he knows, deep down, that someone will catch him if he falls. Sterling had been living with that net underneath him for almost a decade. Every risk he took, every mistake he made, every time he chose Howard's approval over his own family, he made those choices knowing he had backup, knowing Dad would be there, knowing the money would keep coming. Not paused, not reduced, canceled. There's a difference, and Sterling was about to learn it. I sat back in my chair and looked at my list. Credit card, done. Monthly transfer, done. Car insurance, done. Apartment lease, queued for morning. 4 items crossed off. But there was one more category. The one that would hurt Sterling more than money ever could. The phone calls. Not calls to banks or insurance companies. Calls to people. The suppliers who extended Sterling extra consideration because of my name. The clients who took meetings with him because I asked them to. The industry contacts who opened doors that would have stayed closed for a 31-year-old without connections. Sterling had spent 3 years building relationships on borrowed credibility. My credibility. The reputation I had earned over 5 decades of honest dealing, reliable service, and keeping my word. He had used my name like currency, and now I was going to withdraw it. Those calls would start at 6 a.m., when the early risers in my industry started checking their phones. I had a list of names. People who needed to know that whatever consideration they had extended to Sterling Henderson was extended on the strength of his father's word. And that word was no longer backing him up. I checked the time again. 3:22. Less than 3 hours until dawn. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat back down at my desk. I had calls to prepare for. There's a certain kind of currency that takes decades to build and lives entirely in other people's trust. I had spent some of mine on my son over the years. Gladly. Proudly. And I spent the early hours of that morning taking it back. 6 a.m. came faster than I expected. The coffee had kept me sharp, and the list on my desk had kept me focused. But the phone calls I was about to make were different from canceling credit cards or insurance policies. Those were financial transactions. These were something else entirely. Over the years, I had made introductions for Sterling, opened doors that would have stayed closed for a 31-year-old without connections, called in favors with suppliers, with boat manufacturers, with marina operators up and down the Georgia coast. When Sterling walked into a room, he walked in carrying my name. When he made a pitch, people listened because they knew his father. When deals got complicated, men extended him patience they wouldn't have extended to a stranger because of me. Because I had asked them to give my son a chance. That's not nothing. That's not something you can put a dollar amount on. That's the kind of capital that takes a lifetime to accumulate and can evaporate in a single conversation. Professional reputation is like credit. You build it over decades. You can spend it in an hour. And once it's gone, no amount of money buys it back. I picked up my phone at 6:15 and started making calls. The first was to a supplier I'd known for 23 years. Good man, reliable. He'd given Sterling preferential pricing on inventory because I asked him to. Morning. It's early, I know. I wanted to catch you before your day started. Everything all right? I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear it from me directly. I kept my voice steady, professional. Sterling will no longer be operating with my backing, my endorsement, or my name. Any courtesies you've been extending on my behalf should be considered concluded. A pause. Then, understood. I'm sorry to hear that. I appreciate you not asking questions. You've never given me a reason not to trust your judgment. That hasn't changed. I made 6 more calls that morning. Different names, different relationships. Same conversation. Men I'd known for 15, 20, 25 years. Men who had done business with my father before they did business with me. Men whose handshakes meant something, and whose word was their bond. I was honest without being dramatic. I didn't explain what Sterling had done. I didn't ask for sympathy or understanding. I simply stated the facts. My son was on his own now. Any considerations extended because of the Henderson name should be withdrawn. You want to know what real power looks like? It doesn't look like money. It doesn't look like threats, or lawyers, or leverage. It looks like men who trust your word without needing an explanation. It looks like phone calls that get answered at 6 in the morning because the person on the other end knows that if Vernon Henderson is calling, it matters. Every single one of them asked if I was all right. Every single one of them said some version of the same thing. I'm sorry to hear that. Let me know if there's anything you need. Not one of them pressed for details. Not one of them questioned my judgment. Not one of them suggested I was being hasty or unfair or should reconsider. That's what 66 years of integrity gets you. People who trust that if Vernon Henderson is making this call, Vernon Henderson has his reasons. People who know you well enough to understand that you don't do things lightly. You don't make decisions in anger, and you don't waste their time with dramatics. By 6:45, the calls were done. Sterling's professional network, the one built on borrowed credibility, was gone. Not reduced, not strained, gone. The doors I had opened for him were now closed. The favors I had called in were now withdrawn. The reputation I had lent him was no longer his to spend. He would find out eventually, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. Whenever he tried to call one of those contacts and found the warmth missing from their voice. Whenever he pitched a deal and felt the room turn skeptical. Whenever he realized that the respect he thought he had earned was actually respect he had borrowed. 66 years. That's how long it took me to build the kind of trust where a single phone call closes every door. And in one night, one terrible night, when my wife bled on our living room floor while my son laughed in the kitchen, Sterling burned through all of it. By 7 a.m., the streaming accounts were canceled. The shared subscriptions were terminated. I had a locksmith booked for 7:30 to change the locks on the Marina office. The office Sterling had a key to. The office where he had been trusted to work alone. I made myself another cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The sky was shifting from gray to pale blue. December light crept across the marsh, turning the water from black to silver. I thought about Howard Myers, probably awake by now, probably wondering if yesterday's scene had consequences. He should be worried, because what I had planned for him was just beginning. There's a particular shade of pale blue that means morning has decided to show up, whether you're ready for it or not. I was ready. I made myself another cup of coffee, my third since midnight, and stood at the kitchen window. The sky shifted from black to charcoal to gray to that pale December blue that only happens in Georgia in winter. The marsh stretched out beyond the glass, the water catching the first light, turning from dark to silver. This was the same view my father saw when he first bought this land 50 years ago. He stood right here, probably at this same window, and watched the sun come up over the water. He was younger than I am now, full of dreams about what he could build. He built it. One dock, one repair shop, one customer at a time. And when he died, he left it to me, and I grew it into something bigger. 3 dealerships, a marina, a name that meant something in this industry. 50 years. That's how long my family has watched this sunrise over this marsh, and I was not about to let Howard Myers take that from us. Not him, not Sterling, not anyone. The coffee was hot and bitter. Perfect. I needed the edge. I had already called my attorney at 6 a.m. and left a voicemail. Russell Pemberton, 72 years old, sharp as a tack, retired from big firm practice, but still took on select clients when the case interested him. I'd been one of those clients for 15 years. The voicemail was simple. Russell, it's Vernon Henderson. I need to restructure the documentation on the marina property. Ironclad. Airtight. This week. Call me back as soon as you're awake. Howard Myers thought he could walk into my house with his pre-drafted documents and his 6-week scheme and walk away with everything my father built. He thought Sterling's signature would be enough. He thought I would never find out until it was too late. He was wrong on all counts. And by the time Russell finished his work, Howard would never, not in this lifetime or the next, get within legal reach of anything I built. The marina would be restructured into a trust, bloodline only, no exceptions, no loopholes. Before I tell you what that attorney call set in motion, and how I made sure Howard Myers could never touch the Henderson legacy again, I need to ask you something. Drop your prediction in the comments. Do you think Howard will face legal consequences, or just social ruin? Add one reason why you think so. A quick note, what follows includes some dramatized details for storytelling impact. The lesson behind it is what matters. The locksmith arrived at 7:30. Punctual, professional. A man in his 50s with a toolbox and a no-nonsense attitude. "Mr. Henderson, I'm here about the locks." "All exterior doors," I said. "Front, back, garage entry, and the side door to the mudroom." He nodded and got to work. I stood in the foyer and watched him remove the lock from my front door. The same lock Sterling had used 1,000 times. Coming home from school, coming back from dates in high school, letting himself in during college breaks, walking through that door every time he visited, every holiday, every Sunday dinner. That key would no longer work. A changed lock is a small thing. A few screws, some hardware, a new set of keys. Takes less than an hour. Costs less than a nice dinner. But it's also a statement. A line drawn in brass and steel. This door no longer opens for you. This house no longer welcomes you. The home that raised you has closed its arms. I watched the locksmith work his way from the front door to the back, replacing each lock with quick, efficient movements. When he finished, he handed me 4 new keys on a simple metal ring. "All done, Mr. Henderson. Same master key works all 4 locks." "Thank you." I paid him in cash and walked him to his truck. He drove away, and I stood in the driveway holding those 4 keys. The morning sun was fully up now, the marsh golden with light, the air cold and sharp. My phone rang. I pulled it from my pocket and looked at the screen. A local number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Vernon Henderson." "Mr. Henderson, my name is Emmett Graves. I work out of the Savannah Marina District. We met once, maybe 3 years ago, at a trade show." The name was vaguely familiar. "What can I do for you, Mr. Graves?" "Actually, sir, I'm calling about what I can do for you." He paused. "I heard through the network what happened, about Howard Myers, about what he tried to do to your family. Word travels fast. In this industry, it does." Another pause. "Mr. Henderson, I'm calling because I have information about Howard Myers, about what he did to another family about 5 years ago. A family that lost everything because of him." I stood very still in my driveway, the keys cold in my hand. "I'm listening." The family's name was Preston, Douglas and Marie Preston, and they want to talk to you because they've been waiting 5 years for someone to finally stop Howard Myers. "The Prestons," I repeated into the phone. Standing in my driveway with the December morning cold against my face. "Tell me everything." Emmett Graves took a breath on the other end of the line. "Douglas and Marie Preston. They owned a small marina operation down near Brunswick. Nothing like your scale, but solid. Family business. 3 generations. And Howard Myers came into their lives the same way he came into yours. Through marriage. His daughter, not Cressida, an older one from a first marriage. She married the Preston's son. 6 months later, Howard showed up with investment proposals and restructuring plans. The morning sun was fully up now, but I felt cold all the way through. What happened to them? They lost everything. The marina, the property, the equipment. Howard's holding company took control through a series of transfers the Prestons didn't fully understand until it was too late. By the time they realized what had happened, the paperwork was already filed, and there was nothing they could do. They tried, Spent 2 years in court, but Howard's lawyers were better, and the documents were technically legal. Predatory, but legal. Emmett paused. Douglas Preston had a heart attack during the proceedings. He survived, but they had to drop the case. Couldn't afford to keep fighting. I stood very still, processing what I was hearing. Howard Myers wasn't an opportunist who saw a chance with my family. He was a predator with a pattern, a method, a history. Why are you telling me this, Mr. Graves? Because Douglas Preston called me this morning. He heard through the network what Howard tried to do to you. And he said, Emmett's voice dropped. He said if there's finally someone who can stop Howard Myers, he wants to help. He has documentation, records of everything Howard did to them. He's been waiting 5 years for someone to fight back. You want to know what real protection looks like? It looks like knowing your enemy's history. It looks like finding the pattern that no one else bothered to trace. Give me Douglas Preston's number, I said. Emmett did. I wrote it on my hand with a pen from my pocket. The call ended, and I stood alone in my driveway, looking at the new keys in one hand and a phone number on the other. 2 weapons, one defensive, one offensive. My phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. Vernon! Russell Pemberton's voice was crisp and alert, despite the early hour. I got your voicemail. Tell me what's happened, I told him. Not everything, not the personal details about Sterling and Lorraine, but enough. The scheme, the documents Howard had prepared, the 6-week plan to take control of Henderson Marine while I was out of state. Russell listened without interrupting. When I finished, his voice was steady. We can protect the property. A trust structure with bloodline restrictions, asset protection provisions, the works. It will take a few days to draft properly, but by the end of the week, Henderson Marine will be legally untouchable. 50 years. That's how long my family has owned that waterfront. My father bought the land when he was younger than Sterling is now. He built the first dock with his own hands. I expanded it into something worth nearly $5 million. And Howard Myers thought he could take it with a stack of papers and my son's signature. Make it ironclad, Russell. Make it airtight. I don't want any loopholes. I don't want any vulnerabilities. If Howard Myers or anyone connected to him ever tries to make a claim on Henderson property, I want them to hit a wall so thick they break their teeth on it. Understood. I'll have preliminary documents ready by Thursday. We'll need your signature and Lorraine's. But once it's filed, the property will be in trust. Bloodline only. No exceptions. Good. I hung up and looked at my house. The locksmith's truck was gone, but the evidence of his work remained. New locks on every door. New keys in my pocket. The house that had welcomed Sterling for 31 years now stood closed to him. A key is a small thing. A few ounces of metal. A few ridges and grooves. Something you carry without thinking. Something you use without noticing. But it represents something larger. Belonging. Welcome home. Sterling had just lost all 3. I walked back inside and stood in the foyer. The house was quiet. Lorraine was still sleeping upstairs, the medication keeping her under. She didn't know about the calls I had made. She didn't know about the locks being changed. She didn't know about the Prestons or Emmett Graves or the pattern I was starting to see. I would tell her. When she woke up, when she was strong enough, I would tell her everything. But right now, in this quiet moment, I let myself feel the weight of what I had done. I had dismantled my son's support system in a single night. Credit card, insurance, monthly transfers, professional backing, locks, everything I had built for him. Everything I had given him, everything he had taken for granted, gone. Some people would call that cold. I called it necessary, and I wasn't finished yet, because somewhere out there, Howard Myers was waking up to a normal morning, thinking he had gotten away with it. He was about to learn otherwise. You ever find out that the man who came for your family has done this before and gotten away with it? That the scheme wasn't improvised, wasn't opportunistic, wasn't even personal. That you were just the next name on a list. I stood in my kitchen with Douglas Preston's phone number written on my hand and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the third ring. His voice was tired, the kind of tired that comes from years of carrying something heavy. Mr. Henderson, Emmett said you might call. I appreciate you being willing to talk to me. Talk. Douglas let out a short, humorless laugh. I've been waiting 5 years for someone to call. Someone who might actually do something. Douglas Preston was 68 years old, retired now, living in a small house in Valdosta with his wife, Marie. They had owned a boat repair operation in Brunswick for 40 years. 3 generations of Preston work, gone in 18 months. Tell me how it happened, I said. The whole thing. And he did. Howard Myers' oldest daughter from his first marriage had married Douglas's son 8 years ago. For the first 2 years, everything seemed normal. Family dinners, holiday visits, the kind of slow integration that happens when families merge through marriage. Then Howard started coming around more often, asking questions about the business, offering advice, making suggestions. He sounded helpful at first, Douglas said. Like he genuinely wanted to see us succeed. He talked about expansion opportunities, tax advantages, ways to protect the property from liability. Howard Myers, the same man who sat at my dining table, the same man who watched my wife collapse. He had done this before. He had practiced. What happened next? He came to us with paperwork, a restructuring plan. Said it would protect the business, make it more efficient. My son was excited, thought Howard was investing in our future. Douglas's voice went flat. On that out of town when they signed the first documents, visiting my sister in Tennessee. By the time I got back, my son had already put his name on 3 different forms. The pattern was identical. The timing, the paperwork, the absent patriarch. How long before you realized what was happening? 6 months. By then. Howard's holding company controlled the majority stake. The restructuring had transferred ownership rights we didn't even know we were giving up. My son didn't understand what he'd signed until our lawyer explained it to us. I want you to understand what it means to realize you're not the first. It means the man who came for your family has done this before. It means he's refined his technique. It means every smile, every handshake, every moment of seeming friendship was calculated. We fought it in court, Douglas continued. 2 years. Spent everything we had on lawyers. But Howard's documents were technically legal. Predatory, manipulative, designed to deceive, but legal. The judge ruled in his favor. And your son divorced Howard's daughter the month after the ruling. Haven't spoken to him in 3 years. The shame was too much. He knows what he did, even if he didn't mean to do it. I thought about Sterling, about the look on his face when he admitted he was the tool, about the tears running down his cheeks as he confessed what happened to his mother. Mr. Preston, Emmett said you have documentation, records of everything Howard did. Every email, every document, every communication. Marie kept copies of everything, even after the lawyers told us to stop hoping. His voice strengthened. We couldn't beat him in court, Mr. Henderson. But maybe you can do something we couldn't. Why do you think I can? Because from what Emmett tells me, you caught him before he finished. You came home early. You found the documents before they were signed. You're not trying to undo what's already done. You're trying to stop what hasn't happened yet. He was right. The Prestons had been fighting from behind, trying to reclaim what was already taken. I was fighting from the front, trying to protect what was still mine. There's something else, Douglas said. Something I've wondered about for 5 years. If Howard did this to us, and now he's doing it to you, how many others are there? How many families has he destroyed that we don't even know about? The first to fight back. Those words changed everything. This wasn't just about my family anymore. This wasn't just about protecting Henderson Marine, or punishing Sterling, or making Howard pay for what he did to Lorraine. This was about stopping a predator. Permanently. Mr. Preston, I want everything you have. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence you've kept. Can you send it to me? Already scanning it. You'll have it by noon. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Douglas's voice was steady now, firm with purpose. Stop him. That's all I ask. Stop him so no other family has to go through what we went through. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, looking out at the marsh. The water was silver in the morning light, peaceful, unchanged. But I had changed. If I was the first person to fight back against Howard Myers, then I had a responsibility, not just to my family, but to the Prestons, to whatever other families he had destroyed, to whoever he would target next if I let him walk away. I wasn't going to let him walk away. I had just finished my conversation with Douglas Preston when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I walked to the upstairs window and looked down. Sterling. He got out of his sedan, the one I had helped him buy, the one that was no longer on my insurance, and walked up the front path. His shoulders were set, his jaw tight. The posture of a man preparing for a hard conversation. He thought he was coming to apologize, to explain, to find some way back into his father's good graces. He had no idea what was waiting for him. I watched from the upstairs window as he reached the front porch. He didn't knock. Why would he? This was his childhood home. He had a key. He'd had a key since he was 16 years old. 20 years of walking through that door whenever he wanted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key ring, found the familiar brass key, slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again, pulled it out, looked at it, put it back in, jiggled it, pushed harder. Nothing. And then he stood perfectly still. I watched understanding dawn on his face, the slight tilt of his head, the way his hand froze on the doorknob, the slow straightening of his spine as realization crept through him. The lock had been changed. You ever watch someone realize that everything they took for granted is gone? It happens in stages. First, the confusion. This can't be right. Then the denial. Try again. It must be stuck. Then the understanding. This is real. This is happening. And finally, the fear. What else has changed? Sterling went through all 4 stages in about 30 seconds. He knocked on the door. 3 firm raps. The knock of a man who still believes he has standing. I didn't answer. He knocked again, harder this time. "Dad! Dad! It's Sterling! Open the door!" I stood at the upstairs window and watched. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I let the silence speak for me. Sterling waited. Knocked a 3rd time. Then he pulled out his phone. I watched him look at the screen, watched his face change again. His phone was dark, not sleeping dark, the kind of dark that means there's no power, no service, nothing. I had canceled his cell phone at 3 a.m. He was still on my family plan, Had been since he was 18. 13 years of monthly payments. I never asked him to contribute to. 13 years of reliable service that he never thanked me for. Gone. Sterling tapped the screen, held down the power button. Nothing happened. He stared at the phone in his hand like it had betrayed him. In a way, it had. Everything he had counted on to catch him when he fell. The key, the phone, the credit card, the insurance, the monthly transfers. All of it had been mine. All of it had been borrowed. And I had taken it all back. He stood on the porch for a long moment, phone in one hand, useless key in the other. Then he turned and looked at the neighbor's house. The Callahans lived next door. Good people. We'd been neighbors for 18 years. Barbara Callahan was probably in her kitchen right now, drinking coffee, having no idea that a small drama was unfolding 30 feet from her window. Sterling walked across the yard to their front door. He knocked. Barbara answered. I couldn't hear what they said, but I could see her face, the concerned expression of a kind woman who senses something serious without knowing the details. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, the type who brought casseroles when someone was sick and remembered everyone's birthday. She looked at Sterling, looked toward our house, looked back at Sterling. Her hand went to her chest, that universal gesture of sympathy and worry. My son. Standing on Barbara Callahan's porch, having to explain that he couldn't get into his own childhood home, that his phone didn't work, that he needed to borrow hers to call his father. That's what it had come to. Barbara disappeared inside for a moment, then came back with her phone. She handed it to Sterling with the expression of someone who wanted to help but didn't know how. Sterling took the phone. He stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then he dialed. A man stripped of everything doesn't look angry. He looks small. That's what I saw through that upstairs window. My 31-year-old son, standing on a neighbor's porch, borrowing a phone to call the father whose house no longer welcomed him. I had done this. I had made this happen. And I felt no regret. My phone rang. Barbara Callahan's number on the screen. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Dad. Sterling's voice was different. The defensiveness was gone. The smooth confidence he had inherited from too many years around Howard Myers, gone. What remained was something raw, something younger, something that reminded me, painfully, of the boy he used to be before the Myers family got their hands on him. Dad, the locks had changed. My phone isn't working. What's happening? I stood at the window and looked down at my son, standing on Barbara's porch with her phone pressed to his ear, looking up at the house that had raised him. Come to the back door, I said. We need to talk. I walked downstairs and opened the back door. Sterling was already there, having come around the side of the house. He stood on the patio where we used to grill steaks on Sunday evenings, where he learned to ride his first bike, where I taught him to throw a football. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was still the same height, same build, but something in him had shrunk. The confidence was gone. The smooth certainty he had carried ever since he married into the Myers family had evaporated. I let him have his silence, because what I was about to say would change everything between us, and I needed him to hear every word. You let your mother lay on that floor. Sterling. He flinched. His eyes dropped to the patio stones. You knew her condition. She has had high blood pressure for 7 years. You have known that for 7 years. You've seen her take her medication every morning. You've heard the doctors tell her to avoid stress. You knew. Dad, I'm not finished. My voice was steady, cold. When your mother told you she felt dizzy, when she said her head was pounding, when she excused herself and went to the living room, you had a choice. You could have followed her. You could have checked on her. You could have called for help. I let the silence stretch. Instead, You went back to the table. You went back to Howard and his paperwork and whatever fantasy he was selling you. And your mother sat on that floor, bleeding, for 20 minutes, waiting for someone to help her. I want you to understand this was not anger talking. This was clarity. Anger burns hot and fades fast. What I felt standing on that patio was something colder, something more permanent. The clear-eyed recognition of who my son had become. A paramedic, a stranger, who had never met your mother in his life, understood the urgency the moment he walked through the door. 8 minutes. That's how long it took him to recognize what you missed in 20. Sterling's face crumpled. Tears ran down his cheeks, just like they had the night before. But I wasn't done. I love you, Sterling. His head came up. Hope flickered in his eyes, desperate, grasping hope. I will always love you. You are my son. Nothing will ever change that. I held you the day you were born. I taught you to walk, to read, to tie your shoes. I watched you graduate. I gave you a job, a career, a future. I loved you through every stage of your life, and I will love you until the day I die. I paused. Let the words settle. But love is not the same as access. The hope in his eyes flickered and died. Love is not the same as trust. Love is not the same as welcome. Love is not the same as open doors and monthly transfers and credit cards and insurance policies. I can love you and still close every door you took for granted. I can love you and still refuse to enable you. I can love you and still say no. Love is not the same as access. I need you to sit with that, because it's the truest thing I've ever said to my son, and it's the hardest thing I've ever had to mean. Right now, every door I've kept open for you is closed. The credit card, the phone, the insurance, the transfers, the keys to this house, all of it, gone. Sterling stood there, tears still running, hands hanging at his sides. He looked like a man who had been told he had a terminal disease, shocked, disbelieving, searching for some way to negotiate with reality. For how long? His voice cracked on the question. Dad, for how long? I looked at my son, at the boy I had raised, the man I didn't recognize. And somewhere underneath all of it, the person he could still become if he chose to. Until you become the kind of man who doesn't need me to answer that question for him. Sterling's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I don't understand. Yes, you do. I kept my voice level. When you understand why what you did was wrong, not because I told you, but because you feel it in your bones, then you'll know. When you can look in the mirror and see clearly who you've been and who you need to become, then you'll know. When you stop asking me how long and start asking yourself how to be better, then you'll know. You think that's harsh? I think it's the greatest gift I could give him. Not a timeline, not a checklist, not a path back to comfort that he could game his way through. Just the truth becomes someone worthy of trust, and the doors will open. Stay who you are, and they stay closed. Go home, Sterling, or wherever you're staying now. Think about what I've said, and when you're ready, really ready, you know where to find me. I stepped back inside and closed the door. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to. I walked upstairs to the bedroom. Lorraine was awake now, sitting up against the pillows, looking at me with those eyes that have known me for 32 years. Is everything okay? She asked. I sat beside her on the bed, took both her hands in mine, felt the warmth of her skin, the steadiness of her pulse. "Everything is handled," I said. "Everything is going to be fine." Lorraine squeezed my hands and told me to get some rest. I told her I would, but first I had to go to the marina. There were things that needed handling, and I couldn't do them from home. I didn't spread gossip myself. I am not that kind of man, but I didn't have to, because the business community of Savannah does that work on its own. By the time I arrived at Henderson Marine just after noon, 3 different people had already called to ask if I was all right. By 2 o'clock, the story of what Howard Myers had attempted and what happened to Lorraine while he sat at my table had reached every corner of the world. Georgia Coast's boating industry. Information moves like water through the docks. It flows downhill, finds every crack, fills every space. Someone tells someone who tells someone else. Details get added, exaggerated, refined. But the core truth remains. Howard Myers came to my house with paperwork designed to steal my family's legacy, and my wife ended up on the floor because of it. Reputation is like credit in a small community. It takes years to build and hours to destroy. Howard's was collapsing by lunchtime. I heard through the network that his phone calls weren't being returned. A business associate who had been planning to meet with Howard next week suddenly had a scheduling conflict. Another contact, someone Howard had known for 15 years, was mysteriously unavailable when Howard stopped by his office. The Oglethorpe Club sent a quiet message through their membership coordinator. Howard and Gloria's invitation to the holiday gala had been rescinded. Not canceled, rescinded, as if it had never been extended in the first place. That's how it works in these circles. The community doesn't announce your exile. They don't send a formal letter or make a public declaration. They just stop including you. Phone calls go unanswered. Invitations disappear. Meetings get rescheduled indefinitely. And slowly, silently, your world gets smaller. I want you to understand what happens when a man like Howard loses his social standing. The money stays. The house stays. The cars and the clothes and the country club membership all still technically there. But everything else disappears. The respect, the influence, the network of favors and connections that took decades to build. Gone. Howard Myers had spent 30 years cultivating his reputation as a savvy investor, a generous philanthropist, a pillar of Savannah society. And in one afternoon, all of it was crumbling because the truth had finally come out. I was in my office at Henderson Marine when the phone rang at 4 o'clock. Douglas Preston's number. "Mr. Henderson, I've been making calls." "What kind of calls?" "The kind that find other people Howard has hurt." Douglas's voice was steady, purposeful. "You and me, we're not the only ones. There's at least 2 more families I've tracked down. Same pattern. Marriage into the family, followed by pressure to restructure assets, followed by documentation that transferred control." I sat back in my chair. "How many victims are we talking about?" "At least 4 families that I can confirm. Maybe more. Howard has been doing this for at least 15 years. 15 years. At least 4 families destroyed. And no one had ever stopped him because each family thought they were alone. Each family was too ashamed to talk about what happened. Each family gave up the fight because they couldn't afford to keep going. The Prestons had documentation. 5 years they'd been waiting. 5 years of holding on to every email, every document, every piece of evidence that proved what Howard had done to them. And now someone had finally given them a reason to hope. "I spoke to my attorney this morning," I said. "Russell Pemberton. He's already working on protecting my property. But if you have documentation of a pattern, multiple families, same methods, that changes things." "It does," Douglas agreed. "Individual cases are hard to prove, patterns are harder to ignore. If we can show that Howard has done this systematically, repeatedly, to multiple victims, we might have grounds for formal action. What kind of action? Criminal referral to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Civil suits for fraud and elder abuse. And if nothing else, a formal complaint to every professional association Howard has ever been a member of. Douglas paused. I've been waiting 5 years for this, Mr. Henderson. I'm not walking away now. Neither am I. I told Douglas to send everything he had to Russell Pemberton. I told him to coordinate with the other families. I told him that whatever it took, however long it took, we were going to make sure Howard Myers never did this to another family again. I hung up, feeling something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not just for my family, but for the Prestons and the others. For every family Howard had destroyed while the world looked the other way. Then, at 5:30, my phone rang again. I looked at the screen. Not Douglas, not Russell, not anyone from the business network. Cressida Henderson, my daughter-in-law. Howard and Gloria's daughter, Sterling's wife. I hesitated for a moment, then answered, Cressida. Mr. Henderson. Her voice was calm, but firm. Different from the polished society voice I was used to hearing. I just came from my parents' house, and I have something to say that can't wait. Cressida had always had sharp eyes, the kind that saw things other people missed. I should have known that eventually those eyes would see her father for what he was. What happened? I asked. I went to their house this afternoon. Her voice was steady, controlled, but underneath I could hear something raw. I told my father exactly what I think of him. And what do you think of him? A pause. Then, I've suspected for years what kind of man he was. The way he talked about other families like they were marks, not people. The deals that always seemed to go his way while someone else lost. The way he counted other people's money like it was already his. She took a breath. But I never had proof. I never had certainty. He was my father. I wanted to believe I was wrong. Her voice cracked slightly. Then Sterling called me this morning from the neighbor's phone. He told me what happened to Lorraine. He told me about the documents. He told me everything. I want you to understand what it costs a daughter to turn against her own father. It's not just anger or disappointment. It's the death of a relationship. The death of the person you thought he was. The death of every good memory now poisoned by the truth. Cressida was paying that price, and she was paying it willingly. What did you say to him? I told him I knew. I told him I finally had proof of what I'd always suspected. I told him that what he did to your family, to Lorraine, to Sterling, to you, was unforgivable. She paused. He tried to explain. He tried to make it sound reasonable. Business opportunity, family restructuring. All the same words he must have used on the Prestons and everyone else. And your mother? My mother sat there and said nothing. She's known all along. Mr. Henderson. She's always known what he was, and she's enabled it. She's chosen comfort over conscience every single time. Cressida's voice hardened. I told them both that I'm done. Not just angry done. I'm not visiting for Christmas. I'm not calling on birthdays. I'm not pretending that everything is fine while they destroy other families for profit. Cressida. I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson. Her voice softened. I'm sorry for what my father did to your family. I'm sorry for what he did to Lorraine. I'm sorry that Sterling got pulled into his orbit and lost himself there, ashamed of her own parents. Those words hit me differently than I expected, because I knew what it cost her to say them. I knew the weight of turning against your own blood, even when that blood had proven itself unworthy. You didn't do this, I said. You're not responsible for your father's choices. Maybe not, but I am responsible for my own. She took another breath. I've broken with them, Mr. Henderson. Not just for now, permanently. I wanted you to hear that from me, directly. Not through Sterling, not through gossip. From me. I sat in my office chair, looking out the window at the marina. The afternoon light was fading, turning the water from blue to gray. My father had looked out this same window 50 years ago. Why are you telling me this? I asked, not suspiciously, genuinely curious. Because I need you to know where I stand. And because, she hesitated, because I want to ask you something. Ask. Is there anything I can do to help Sterling understand, not to fix things? I know that's not my place. Not to plead his case or make excuses for him, but maybe to help him become the man you raised him to be. She paused, because I think that man is still in there somewhere, underneath all the influence from my father, underneath the bad choices and the blindness. I think the person you raised is still there, and I'd like to help him find his way back, if that's possible. You know what surprised me most? Not that she called, not that she turned against her parents, that she asked how to help Sterling become better, not how to get him off the hook, not how to restore his access to my money or my name. How to help him grow. That told me everything I needed to know about Cressida Henderson. I appreciate that, I said, more than you know. I love him, Mr. Henderson. I know that might be hard to believe right now, but I love who he could be, not just who he's been. And I hope that this might be the wake-up call he needs. It might be. Is there anything specific I can do? I thought about it. Don't rescue him. Don't soften the consequences. Let him feel the full weight of what he did and what he lost. That's the only way any of this means anything. I understand. And Cressida, thank you for calling, for telling me where you stand, for choosing us. She chose us. My daughter-in-law, faced with choosing between her own parents and her in-laws, chose the Hendersons, not because we were richer or more powerful, because we were right. Take care of yourself, I said, and take care of Sterling. He's going to need someone who sees him clearly. I will. I hung up and sat there for a long moment, looking at the phone in my hand. Howard had lost his daughter today. Really lost her, in the way that matters. And somewhere out there, Sterling was beginning to understand what it meant to lose everything he'd taken for granted. 4 days of silence stretched between us like the winter fog rolling off the Wilmington River, thick, gray, and impossible to see through. I had won. The marina was protected. The trust documents were filed. Howard's scheme had failed before it even got started. By every measure that mattered to the business world, I had achieved complete victory. So why did the house feel so empty? Lorraine was recovering well. The doctors said her blood pressure was stabilizing, that the crisis had passed. She was back to cooking breakfast, back to humming while she worked in the kitchen. But she watched me differently now, with concern, with the kind of careful attention that told me she could see what I was trying to hide. The morning routine felt mechanical. Coffee, news, walk to the marina, meetings that meant nothing, numbers that didn't matter. I found myself avoiding Oak Street, where I knew Sterling had rented a small apartment after losing access to the waterfront unit. I didn't want to see his car. I didn't want to know. Emmett Graves stopped by the marina on December 12th with business news. A potential buyer for the third dealership wanted to discuss terms. Good money. Clean deal. The kind of opportunity I would have jumped at 6 months ago. Vernon, you hear what I said. The smell of diesel and salt water clung to Emmett's jacket, and for a moment I was 22 again. teaching a 5-year-old Sterling how to tie a bowline knot on the deck of our first boat. His small fingers fumbling with the rope, his face scrunched in concentration. The way he looked up at me when he finally got it right, like I had given him the whole world. "Vernon." "I heard you," I said. "Tell them I'll think about it." Emmett nodded and left. I sat at my desk and thought about nothing. The next day, December 13th, Lorraine came home from grocery shopping with an odd expression on her face. She walked into my study holding a plain white envelope. "This was in the mailbox," she said. "No stamp, no return address." But I recognized the handwriting. She handed it to me. My name was written on the front in careful, precise letters. The same handwriting I had taught a 7-year-old boy at this very desk, tracing letters on lined paper until he got them right. Sterling's handwriting. The envelope had been hand-delivered, not mailed, which meant Sterling had walked up to this house, put this letter in our mailbox, and walked away without knocking. He hadn't asked to come in, hadn't asked to talk. He had simply left something and gone. I waited until Lorraine went upstairs before I opened it. The letter was 2 pages, front and back, written by hand. No typed formality, no lawyer language, just my son's words on paper. I read it alone in my study, with the December light fading through the window. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for a second chance or a path back to the life he had lost. He simply acknowledged what he had done, named his failures without excuse, thanked me for being the father he had refused to appreciate. My hands trembled so badly that the paper rattled against the desk. 66 years old. And I had forgotten what it felt like to have my heart broken, in a good way. I read the letter 3 times, searching for the catch, the angle, the hidden ask, the manipulation I had learned to expect from anyone connected to Howard Myers. I found none. Sterling wrote about specific memories. The 2019 Marina expansion, when I had wanted to give him more leadership and he had dismissed it as old-fashioned. He admitted he had done it because Howard told him the deal wasn't ambitious enough. He wrote about his marriage, how part of him had chosen Cressida because Howard approved, because it felt like joining something larger than himself. He wrote about the night everything fell apart, about hearing his mother say she felt dizzy, about going back to the table instead of checking on her. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame Howard or circumstances or anyone else. He simply said, "I chose wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it, and I did it anyway." The letter ended with a single line that I read over and over until I had memorized it. "I am trying to become someone you would recognize. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I wanted you to know I'm trying." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Beside it was a photograph I'd kept for 30 years. A 5-year-old boy holding his first caught fish, grinning at the camera with pure, uncomplicated joy. Through the study window, I watched a pelican dive into the gray water and emerge with nothing. It tried again, and again. On the 4th dive, it rose with a fish gleaming silver in its beak. I sat there as the December sun set, painting the marsh in shades of orange and gold. I didn't know what to do with this offering from my son. I didn't know if it was enough, or if anything could ever be enough. But for the first time since that terrible afternoon, I wanted to find out. I wanted to answer. I hadn't answered Sterling's letter yet. It sat in my desk drawer beside that old photograph, waiting. I didn't know what to say, but before I could figure it out, the world shifted again. Russell Pemberton called on December 16th with news that changed the shape of everything. The Georgia Department of Law has opened a formal inquiry into Howard Myers' business practices, Russell said. His voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. The Prestons' documentation was enough to trigger the investigation. Combined with the other evidence we've gathered, they're taking this seriously. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Investigations like this can take months. But Vernon the Prestons weren't his only victims. 3 more families have come forward since the inquiry was announced. 3 families who lost businesses, properties, savings, all of them with stories that matched the same pattern. 3 more families. Howard's reach was wider than I had known. How many people had sat where I sat, watching their lives unravel? How many families had trusted that smooth voice and that confident smile, only to find themselves signing away everything they'd built? The story will appear in tomorrow's Savannah Morning News, Russell continued. Business section. Nothing sensational, just the facts. But in this town, that's enough. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a paragraph in the business section that everyone reads over their morning coffee. Sometimes it's a quiet conversation at the country club, a name crossed off an invitation list, a phone call that doesn't get returned. The investigation was formal now, public. There was no hiding from it. Over the next few days, I watched Howard's world collapse from a distance. The Oglethorpe Club sent a letter requesting Howard's resignation pending the outcome of the investigation. Not suspension, resignation. They were distancing themselves before the stain could spread. Business associates who had courted Howard for years suddenly became unavailable. Meetings were canceled. Phone calls went to voicemail and never got returned. The network that had taken Howard 30 years to build was dissolving in days. I saw him once at a gas station on Victory Drive, December 18th. I was filling up my truck when Howard pulled in on the other side of the pumps. He saw me. I know he did. Our eyes met for just a moment across the concrete and the hoses and the cold December air. Howard didn't speak. He didn't have to. His shoulders told the whole story, curved inward like a man bracing for blows that wouldn't stop coming. His face was gray. His silver hair, usually so perfectly styled, looked unwashed. He moved like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. The Myers name had been a skeleton key in Savannah, opening every door that mattered, granting access to every room worth entering. Now it was a padlock, sealing them out from the world they had spent decades cultivating. I finished pumping my gas and drove away. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say. 2 days later, Lorraine came home from her bridge club with news about Gloria. Margaret Thornton called, Lorraine said quietly, setting her purse on the kitchen counter. Margaret Thornton had taken over as chair of the Christmas Charity Gala, the same position Gloria had held for 6 years. Gloria showed up at the planning meeting yesterday, walked in like nothing had happened, like she still belonged there. What happened? They asked her to leave, politely but firmly. Margaret said Gloria just stood there for a moment, like she couldn't process what was happening. Then she walked out without a word. I thought about Gloria Myers, 64 years old, a woman who had measured her worth in invitations and committee positions and charity galas with her name on the program. A woman who had looked down on anyone who didn't belong to the right clubs, wear the right clothes, know the right people. Now her mailbox was empty. Her phone was silent. The world that had defined her identity had simply stopped including her. She didn't know how to be anything else, Lorraine said. Now she has to learn. I should have felt triumph. I had won. Howard's scheme was exposed. His victims were getting justice. His social empire was crumbling. Everything I had set out to protect was protected. But standing in my kitchen, listening to Lorraine describe Gloria's humiliation, I felt tired. Just tired. The next day, I drove past the grocery store on Habersham Street and saw Gloria's car in the parking lot. She was sitting in the driver's seat, not moving, just staring through the windshield at nothing. I slowed down as I passed. She didn't see me. She was somewhere else, entirely lost in a world that no longer made sense to her. A woman who had helped destroy other families' dignity was now sitting alone in a parking lot, stripped of her own. I drove on. Their world got very small. The invitations stopped. The phone went quiet. The life they had built on other people's losses was collapsing under its own weight. And somewhere in that silence, watching Howard's empire turn to ash, I realized something. Howard Myers wasn't my enemy anymore. He was just a man who had finally been caught. A man paying the price for years of predation. A man whose punishment was already happening, with or without my involvement. The external battle was over. Now I had to decide what to do about the internal one. The external battle was won. Howard was finished. The investigation was proceeding. Justice, slow and quiet, was doing its work. Now came the harder part. December 21st. Russell Pemberton arrived at the house with a leather folder containing the final trust documents. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Just ink and plastic, but it carried 50 years of Henderson history. I signed where Russell indicated. Lorraine signed where she needed to. Russell witnessed dated and gathered the papers with the careful precision of a man who understood what he was handling. 50 years of work, Russell said, sliding the documents into his folder. 3 dealerships, a marina, waterfront property worth millions. Now it belongs to the Hendersons forever. No one outside the bloodline can touch it. It always did, I said. Now the law agrees. Russell paused at the door. Vernon, there's a provision in the trust you should understand. If circumstances change, if Sterling demonstrates genuine growth, you have the authority to amend the trust to include him. But only you. He can never force his way in. The decision stays with you, always. I nodded. Russell left. The house went quiet. Lorraine stood at the window, looking out at the marsh. The December light was pale and cold, turning the water silver. She didn't speak for a long moment. Marriage is a language spoken in silences. Lorraine had always been fluent. You've been carrying something since Thursday, she finally said. I can see it in how you hold your coffee, in how you look out the window when you think I'm not watching. What do you mean? She turned to face me. Those eyes, 32 years of knowing me. 32 years of reading my silences the way I read hers. Sterling's letter, she said. I stared at her. You knew. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope. The same careful letters you taught him at that desk when he was 7. She walked over and took my hand. I have been waiting for you to tell me when you were ready. I went to my desk drawer, retrieved the letter, held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the paper, the weight of my son's words. He wrote to me, I said, not asking for anything, not making excuses, just acknowledging. Read it to me. I sat down in my chair. Lorraine sat in the armchair across from me. The same chair where she'd read books while I worked late. The same chair where she'd waited up for Sterling to come home from high school dances. I started reading. Sterling's words filled the room. His confession about the marina expansion, about choosing Howard's approval over his father's judgment. His acknowledgement that he had married partly because Howard approved. His admission that he had known his mother was in distress and had gone back to the table anyway. I hadn't cried in front of my wife in 11 years. The streak ended somewhere around the 3rd paragraph. When I finished, Lorraine was quiet for a long time. The December sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the floor. He sounds like the boy we raised, she said finally. Before Howard. Before all of it. Maybe that boy was always there, I said, just buried under all that wanting. Do you believe him? I thought about the question, about the letter that asked for nothing. about Sterling delivering it by hand and walking away without knocking, about the words that named specific failures, specific moments of choice, specific ways he had let us down. "I believe he's trying," I said. "Whether trying is enough, I don't know yet." Lorraine nodded slowly. "Some lessons can't be taught. They can only be lived." He's living them now. No credit, no backing, no doors opening because of my name. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases. Maybe that's what he needed all along, to find out who he is when there's nothing to catch him. "What will you do?" I looked at my wife, at the woman who had stood beside me through every triumph and failure, who had raised our son with more patience than I ever had, who had nearly died on our living room floor while that same son laughed in the kitchen. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm not closing the door." You spend your whole life building walls, brick by brick, year by year. You construct defenses against the world's betrayals, and then someone reminds you that walls have doors, that the same hands that built the barrier can also build a bridge. "Christmas is 4 days away," Lorraine said quietly. "I know. We've never had a Christmas without him. Not since he was born." "I know." She squeezed my hand. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying whatever you decide, I'll stand with you. I always have." The December light faded over the marsh. We sat together in the study, my wife and I, watching the sky turn from silver to gold to purple, not speaking, not needing to. Some lessons can only be lived. Sterling was living his. And maybe there was a way forward. Not back to what we had been. That was gone forever. But forward to something new. Something built on truth instead of pretense. Christmas was 4 days away, and for the first time, I wondered if there might be one more place setting at our table. Christmas morning came the way it always does in Georgia cold. Clear and smelling of salt water and possibility. I didn't invite Sterling to dinner. Neither did Lorraine. We talked about it the night before, sitting together in the kitchen while she prepared the ham. We decided to wait. Not forever. Just long enough to see if his letter was the beginning of real change or just another angle. Some lessons can only be lived. We would give him time to live them. I woke before dawn and drove to the marina alone. The dock creaked under my boots the way it had for 50 years. Same wood, same water, same Henderson standing watch. My father built this dock with his own hands in 1975. His father helped him carry the lumber. I stood here as a boy, watching them work, learning that some things are built to last, that some things belong to blood. I realized I was standing in the exact spot where my father taught me to tie my first knot. A bowline. The king of knots, he called it. I taught Sterling the same knot on this same dock when he was 5 years old, his small fingers fumbling with the rope, his face scrunched in concentration. The pure joy when he finally got it right. The sun rose over the water, orange and gold spreading across the gray December sky. The marsh birds began their morning chorus, herons and egrets calling to each other across the tidal flats. The sun doesn't care about your problems. It rises anyway. That's the lesson my father taught me before he taught me anything about boats. The world keeps turning whether you're ready or not. Your job is to be ready. Howard Myers had tried to take 50 years of Henderson work with a handshake and a smile. He learned what Henderson's stubbornness looks like. Now he was sitting in his big house, waiting for investigations and watching his empire crumble. The Prestons would get their justice. The other families would get their day. And the man who had made a career of destroying legacies would spend his remaining years watching his own legacy turn to ash. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. satisfied, but tired. Footsteps on the dock behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew those footsteps. Lorraine appeared beside me, moving carefully but steadily. She held 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cold morning air. She handed me one without speaking. "Merry Christmas, Vernon." "Merry Christmas, Lorraine." We stood together, looking out at the water. The coffee was hot and bitter and perfect. The sun continued to rise. The marsh birds continued to call. What do you call it when you win everything and still feel the weight of what you lost? When you protect your legacy, but your son is out there somewhere, alone, learning lessons you wished you could have taught him without the pain. I didn't have a word for it. Maybe there wasn't one. "Vernon," Lorraine's voice was soft. "Look." I turned. In the marina parking lot, 50 yards away, a figure stood beside an old pickup truck. Not the sedan I had helped him buy. That was gone now, probably sold or repossessed. An old Ford, rust showing on the wheel wells. The kind of truck a man drives when he's starting over. Sterling. He wasn't approaching. He was just standing there, watching us. Watching the dock where his grandfather built something from nothing. Watching the marina that had been in his family for 3 generations. Our eyes met across the gravel and the morning light. I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I didn't walk toward him. But I didn't look away either. "He came," Lorraine said quietly. "He's not ready yet. Neither am I. But he came." Yes. I watched my son standing in that parking lot, smaller somehow, humbled by the weight of what he'd lost. He came. We stood there for a long moment, father on the dock, son in the parking lot, mother beside her husband. 3 Hendersons on Christmas morning, separated by 50 yards and the consequences of choices that couldn't be undone. Then Sterling raised one hand. Not a wave, just a brief acknowledgement. A gesture that said, "I see you. I know you see me." That's enough for now. I raised my coffee cup slightly in return. He got in his truck and drove away. The old Ford coughed and rumbled as it disappeared down the marina road. Some people will say what I did was cold. They'll say I should have run to him, embraced him, forgiven everything on the spot. Because it was Christmas, and he was my son. They weren't there when my wife lay bleeding on our living room floor, while he laughed in the kitchen. They weren't there when he admitted he chose a stranger's approval over his own mother's life. Cold, maybe. Necessary, absolutely. I watched the road long after Sterling's truck disappeared. The sun was fully up now, the marsh golden with morning light. Lorraine squeezed my arm and went back to the house to finish Christmas preparations. I stayed on the dock a while longer, thinking about 50 years, about my father, about the son I raised, and the man he was trying to become. He would find his way back, or he wouldn't. Some doors stay open forever, some close and never reopen. The choice was his now. Either way, the Hendersons would endure. The loop closes. And to you listening to my story, remember, this family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart. Don't make my mistake. I spent 30 years building Henderson Marine, working 70-hour weeks, missing birthdays and anniversaries, believing the business would always be there for my family. I was so focused on providing that I forgot to truly see the people around me. I almost lost my son because I didn't notice the wolf standing right beside him. This revenge story taught me something I wish I'd learned decades ago. The people who want to destroy you don't announce themselves. They smile, they flatter, they wait. But here's what I've also learned from this life story. The truth has a way of surfacing. Every lie eventually cracks. I believe God put me through this for a reason. Maybe so I could share this revenge story with you today. So you don't have to learn these lessons the hard way, like I did. This life story nearly broke my family. But it also showed me what really matters. Now I'm asking you, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Drop a comment below and share your life story. Your experience might help someone else who's going through the same thing right now. If this revenge story resonated with you, hit that share button and send it to someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And remember, names and certain details have been changed to protect everyone involved. But the heart of this story is absolutely true. God bless you all.